Welcome to the Proactive Planner, a practical podcast for people ready to take action to live a more worry-free life. Avoid an accidental legacy and be a proactive planner today.
And now for the disclaimer. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to be, nor is it legal advice. By listening to this podcast, no attorney-client relationship is created between the speaker or the listener, nor is anything said in this podcast confidential. To have an attorney-client relationship, listeners must engage the law firm of Wilson Legal by signing our engagement letter and making an investment. Names of persons referenced in this podcast have been changed unless the name refers to an author, historical, or public figure.
Michelle Wilson, welcome to your own show. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you, Jeff?
I'm hanging in there. Might hear some deep breathing today, so it'll be fun for everybody. But I'm really excited to get this show started with you. Estate planning is something that I know absolutely nothing about. So it's more than just being a co-host for the show. It's about learning about what I'm missing out on so that I can pay you a lot of money for your services, of course.
And it'd be a money well spent.
Indeed. Especially for the kids. So before we go into kind of your origin story, could you tell me what a proactive planner is?
Jeff, a proactive planner is somebody who wants to know what's going to happen in their future and have control over what their future looks like. Mm-hmm. There's somebody who said, and I don't remember who did, that if we don't have a plan to get where we want to be, that we're going to get nowhere.
Okay.
And so being a proactive planner is in life is just thinking about what's going to happen and how you're going to get there ahead of time so that you don't end up accidentally being where you don't want to be.
Okay. And I'm sure you talk to a lot of people who are in my shoes who kind of going through life, raising a family, having a career, trying to, build my own business, but then not thinking about these kind of things.
Correct. Only about 65% of Americans have a will who are over the age of 65.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So that number drops dramatically then once you go lower.
Correct. And ironically, during COVID, the 20-somethings were the ones who were more interested in getting their estate planning done than the 30 and 40-somethings.
Really?
Yeah. And it might be because, if you're in your 30s or 40s, you're building up your business. Like you said, you're building your career. You're more concerned about cash flow coming in than you are concerned about making plans for your kid's future, your spouse's future.
Wow. Huh. Okay. All right. That's interesting. So this is your origin story. Every great podcast, or any podcast really, should start off with an origin story. So that's what we're going to do today for this episode. So how did you get into law to begin with?
It was a little bit by accident. I actually am not one of those people that grew up saying, I always want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a mommy. And when I was in middle school, I asked my dad about being a pilot or a lawyer. To the pilot question, he said, honey, it's going to be way too expensive for you to learn how to fly before they'll pay you to do it.
Yeah.
And then for the attorney selection, he said, honey, why would you ever want to be a sleazy attorney? Basically that all attorneys are sleazy and they're all out to get your money. Yeah. And he didn't want his daughter to even think that that was a good option for her.
Right.
So I put it away. I didn't consider it after that until I was in college and I got a speeding ticket when I was visiting home. And I was in college out of state at Southern Wesleyan University, so about an hour and a half drive. And I ended up hiring an attorney down here to help me with that ticket. Well, when I wrote a narrative of what happened, he asked me if I'd ever considered law school. And I said no, because my dad thinks attorneys are sleazy. And he, by the way, was our family lawyer. So I don't even know if he got offended by that. But he encouraged me to apply to law school. And at the time, I was looking for a master's degree of some kind. My undergraduate degree is in business administration and computer information systems. So I wanted something that wasn't an MBA because everybody else seemed to be going to get an MBA, and something that kept my options really broad. So I looked at law school because you have a lot of options once you go to law school. And I kind of wanted to prove to my dad that I could do it and not be a sleazy attorney.
Okay. Yeah, definitely done that before. The old, I'm going to prove you wrong.
Correct.
Awesome. So why did you choose estate planning?
So while I was working for the same guy who's now retired, he would do these little 5-page wills for people who needed a will. And I remember looking at that 5-page document. All it really did was appoint somebody to be in charge, say what percent went to whom, and how they wanted to be buried or cremated, right? And that was it. There wasn't really any kind of effort put into the document to protect the person that it was for. And so I asked him, why are you creating such a short document? Is there something else that we can do to protect the client now? And he told me that he does the wills almost for free. Since he doesn't make money off of it, he makes money on the probate. He doesn't put any effort into protecting the client when they come in to get a will.
Wow.
And he'd been using the same form for 25 years.
Oh,
So
wow.
for people who go to somebody who's been doing this for 25 years, they're going to get perhaps that same 5-page document that attorney was using in the 80s.
Wow. The 80s. Well, for those 20-year-olds, they don't even know what that means.
Right. It was done on a typewriter probably, or a dot matrix printer, something
Wow.
like that.
So what do you do with wills then that kind of separates you from that?
We do two things that distinguish us from other attorneys. The first thing we do is we put a lot more protection inside your will at the time you come to see us. And we actually tell you about the difference between a will and a trust, because a trust is really a better option for most families. So we go over those options. We put inside of each will and each trust that we do something called a special needs trust, so that if your children or your spouse are disabled at the time you die, say you're in a car wreck together, you pass away, the child is disabled, that trust, special needs trust that's inside of your will or your trust, is going to protect whatever that child inherits from being paid to Medicaid at the end of that child's life, to reimburse Medicaid dollar for what benefits that child received while they were living. I think the child's money should go to pay Medicaid, fine, but after they pass, and your money should not be used to reimburse the government.
Right.
So I do things like that to get the government out of people's back pocket inside the will or the trust. We also put extra powers in there. The ability to pay for a child's funeral is in there. And of course, the basics like appointing an executor. We waive anything we can get you out of to make your job, if you're the executor or trustee, the person in charge, easier. The other thing we do that distinguishes us from other law firms is we teach you how to use what we create for you. It's not coming into the office, saying what you want, going over it once with a lawyer, signing, and then going home with a folder that you don't know what to do with. I don't want people to keep putting these documents in a drawer and forgetting about them for 20 years.
Okay. So you care is really
Yeah.
what the bottom line is there.
That's true.
Wow, that's amazing. All right. So who really needs to use your services? Like, is it people like me? Obviously. Is it 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds? Like who desperately needs to come see you now?
So until you're the age of 18, you are covered by your parents. Your parents have control over where you live, what happens with money you earn,
Right.
that kind of thing. Unless you earn a lot of money, and then there's conservatorships, but that's another topic. Really, once you turn 18, if you are alive, you need to start doing planning. And I know that sounds kind of weird, because you would say, okay, I'm 18. You don't have anything. You don't have a job, probably. You don't have any money. You're probably still living on your parents' money. But if you go to UGA for undergrad, let's say, and you drink a little too much over a Saturday night, you have to go to the hospital to get your stomach pumped, and you don't want your dad to find out because he is going to kill you. The hospital will not release that information to your father if you tell them not to, because you're an adult. What parents don't realize is that their college-bound children, unless they have a healthcare directive or a financial power of attorney, are going to be able to get around telling mom and dad anything that's
Wow.
outside of the college campus.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So going to a bar, that's downtown Athens. That's not part of the college. The permissions that you give for the college are only limited to that campus. And what a lot of parents mistakenly believe is that their high school coach or counselor said, as long as you're signed up for the school, you're good to go. Well, there's another layer of protection that every kid needs. And that's having that financial power of attorney and healthcare directive to put parents in a place where they can get information.
Right.
And I do have a little story to go with that. Goes back to my mom, who still doesn't 100% understand what I do. But
That it is mine.
my aunt called her after my cousin had too much to drink. He had also taken some prescription medications, apparently. And they had a very bad effect with the beer that he had, to the extent that they had to take him to the hospital and they weren't sure if he would make it.
Wow.
Well, he was arrested for DUI that night, and it was the police that took him to the hospital. And my aunt had called my mom to say, in a panic, I really need to find out how he's doing. I can't get any information, right? And if you can imagine, as a parent, your child in a hospital potentially dying, and you can't get anyone to talk to you. And my mom called me up and said, hey, Shell, is there isn't there a document you can have your aunt sign so that she can get information about your cousin? And I said that'd be great if we could do that. But because my cousin was 28, he was an adult.
Yeah.
And he had not planned ahead to have those documents so that if an emergency happened, his parents could get information. So they didn't have any legal right to find out what was going on with their own son.
Wow. Okay.
So I don't ever want that to happen to someone else. And there's a lot of times in life, like with my aunt, where if you wait too long, it's like squeezing the toothpaste out of the toothpaste tube. You can't get it back in. It's out. And now we're in a new situation that we have to plan differently for.
Okay. All right. So we're talking parents. Mm-hmm. What about, okay, so,
and seniors too, of course.
Of course.
I started with the 18-year-olds all the way up until you're 90-something, right? Mm-hmm. You need to have documents. Actually, the older you get, I feel like the life documents, the power of attorney, the healthcare directive are actually more important than even having a will or a trust at that point.
Right.
Because older folks tend to sell their property, move into an apartment, go to independent living, go to assisted living.
Right.
Now they're down to just bank accounts. And if you don't have a power of attorney, you can't change the bank account if your bank gets bought out and you really hate their new rules, and it's really tough to just do business and take care of your loved ones. You've got to go get a conservatorship from probate court if you don't have that. Yeah. And that process, conservatorship, takes about 8 to 10 months. It costs anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000 with an attorney. You have to hire another attorney for your parent that you're getting it for. There's 2 hearings that you have to do. One hearing to approve the person who's applied as conservator. The second hearing to approve how you've decided to invest the money and what you plan to do with it. And the judge has to approve that. In Georgia, you can't spend any income as a conservator if it goes into the principal. And you know how interest rates have been the last several years. Can you imagine spending only 0.01% of a bank account without the judge giving you their blessing?
Wow.
That means you can't buy tennis shoes or Ensure Shakes from Costco or Depends or any of the things that your parents might need.
Yeah.
Without getting the judge to approve it.
Wow. Okay. So what about somebody like me? So I have a 12-year-old, I have a 5-year-old wife, myself with massive allergy issues.
Sorry about the cat.
Which is why I'm coughing, is because of allergies, but we're working through it. So what would be ideal for me?
Well, it depends on what you want. That's really where we always start, Jeff. So the first place I always start is, what do you want for your kids and for your wife if something happens to you? What do you want to have happen?
Them to be taken care of completely.
Do you want the things they have to do after you pass away, do you want that to include a court process?
Never.
Okay. So in Georgia, unfortunately, even if you have a small estate, whether it's small or large, you have to go through the same probate process if you don't have a trust in place and you own real property. Do you own real property?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you own real property, the only way to change ownership on a piece of real property is to sign a deed, right? If you pass away and your name is on the deed, then a new deed typically does need to be signed. So we need to appoint somebody who has permission to sign your name after you die.
Okay.
The exceptions to that would be joint tenancy with right of survivorship. So if you own it jointly with your spouse, and it's going to say joint tenancy with right of survivorship on the deed, if you do own it jointly. And for our listeners who don't remember, they bought their property 30 years ago, they don't remember how they owned it. As long as the property was purchased after 1990, it's going to be scanned in onto the online clerk's website, the Georgia Superior Court Clerks Council.org, association.org, I think. GSCCCA, lots of C's.org. We'll put that in the show notes so everybody can have it. If you want some cheap entertainment, there's a small monetary fee you can pay for 4 hours on that website, and you can actually check in on how much your neighbors all paid for their houses.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because we in Georgia charge $1 per thousand that you use to pay for your house, and that's in the stamp in the top right corner.
Oh, wow.
So just move the decimal point three times.
Yep.
But you can also see if your property is held jointly. That's the only thing that we can do where it magically changes, besides having it in a trust, to the survivor's name. So I would say for your family, we'd probably be looking at a revocable trust. And a revocable trust is kind of like a picnic basket. You create essentially another place setting at your table for this trust, right? When you sign it, it's creating the basket. And when we put the deed, the house, into the trust, we're actually putting it into the trust name. And then when something happens to you, it's like you take the handles of your basket and you hand it off to your wife, and she continues to run the trust in your absence. And then when she passes, that basket gets handed on to your oldest child, probably at that point. And they would continue to manage the property in your basket. So a revocable trust is really a good idea for folks who are in the stage of life that your family is.
Okay. So when you work in an industry like this, it can be very depressing, but also very fruitful and very exciting. So give me a crazy story or two of a client or something that you've had to deal with here.
So maybe one true story and maybe my one good joke about death and dying, right?
All right.
Because you told me this morning that your kids go to a Christian school. So I feel like you might like this particular joke. And I'll do that one first, and then we'll think about a story. So my parents went on a trip to Israel to see all the Holy Land sites with the church. And they did that about 3 years ago. And when they went on this trip, they heard a story about another couple that went several years before they did. And it was one of those situations where, and you've probably seen couples like this, where the wife is constantly nagging the husband, honey, come on, honey, why are you so slow? Honey, don't forget that bag. And every time they would get on a bus to go somewhere, everybody would feel really, really bad for this poor fellow who had to follow his wife around to do everything she said. Well, unfortunately, 3 days before the end of their 10-day excursion trip in Israel, she passed away of a heart attack.
Oh, wow.
In the Holy Land.
Wow.
And so they went to the funeral director and they said, the husband said, what are my options? And the funeral director said, well, you've got two. You can be buried in the Holy Land for just $250, or we can transport your wife back to the States for $5,000.
Holy cow.
Which one would you like to do? And the husband said, let me think about that. And apparently he went to the side room where the coffins are all set up on display, and he paced. And he probably did 10 laps in that room. And after a while, the funeral director went in to check on him, and he said, well, I apologize for your loss, sir, but it does seem like it's taking a while. Is there anything else I can do to help you decide? And he said, well, I think I've made my decision. I'm just going to have to ship her home. I just hate to pay that much money. And the funeral director said, well, do you mind me asking why you made that decision? Because frankly, a lot of people who pass away here really love the chance of being buried in the Holy Land, near some of these really famous places. And the husband looked at the funeral director and he says, well, y'all buried a man here 2,000 years ago and he came to life again in 3 days, and I just can't take that chance.
Oh, God. Jeez. That's bad. Michelle, that was great delivery. That was great. That's terrible. What a joke. All right, that's a good Christian joke. I'm gonna have to tell that joke myself to the church folk when I get to service on Sunday for sure. Unbelievable. Nice one. All right, so
now for a crazy story.
Yes.
Well, let's see. Crazy story. I'll tell you the story of how you can be 87 and never have had anything happen in your life with the police ever, and suddenly find yourself, after caregiving for your wife with Lewy body dementia for 9 years, charged with misdemeanor battery and in a contested guardianship with 4 of your 6 children.
Wow. Okay.
So this is my Casa Blanca moment story.
Uh-huh.
I'm not going to use names just to protect his identity, but this man who came to my office had 6 kids, and his wife had Lewy body dementia for many, many years. He had been caregiver for her, I think, for 9 before he came to see me, and had gotten so bad that he was really in need of some help. He had a couple kids would come every once in a while to like comb her hair or mow the grass, but for the most part, it was just him. And so we were talking about options. His daughter had taken mom to her house for the weekend and never brought her back. And mom had, right before one daughter took her to her house for the weekend, at Thanksgiving, mom had like a dark area under her eye. So it looked like she had a black eye. And then at Christmas, it was there again. And the kids accused their father of hitting their mother, even though she in her 80s had such thin skin, the doctor said she could have been drinking from a glass like we've got here and hit the bridge of her nose with the glass.
Yeah.
And then the blood naturally pools here because there's a cavity in your face there. So anyway, the kids disregarded what the doctor said. They filed with Adult Protective Services. An investigation was opened and charges were brought.
Wow.
And we also had 2 competing guardianship petitions in the probate court. They wanted mom. They wanted mom, I think, honestly, for mom's money. Mom had a trust and dad had a trust, right? And mom had $5 million in her trust and dad had $5 million in his trust. And this was back when the estate tax exemption was $10 million. So my client would look at his investments every year and make a big donation to the church or a big donation to somewhere else to keep their assets under that limit. Well, he ended up fighting them for 10 months and before he gave up. And while that guardianship was pending, we had the criminal case to do, right? And, in criminal cases, when you want to show the state that you've got somebody of good character, you ask for character witnesses. Well, this gentleman was tall and skinny and always had to, or thin, lean. He always had to have the first 25 minutes to say what was on his mind in every meeting. And I asked him before our hearing for the criminal case, the next hearing, the arraignment, I asked him about character witnesses. Mr. Client, who are the people we could call to say he was upper management in IBM for many years. He actually worked with my granddad and hired my dad with IBM in the 70s. And that's why I call him my Casa Blanca client, because of all the gin joints in all the world, you walked into mine. Mm-hmm. Like, this had to have been the universe working, because I get you. I get how you think, right? But he reared back in his chair and he goes, all the people I know are dead. What character witnesses?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, he kind of stuck there.
So eventually the charges were dropped. He gave up the guardianship and his wife passed away about 6 months later. She had been put in a facility because she had gotten to the point where she, dementia takes your mind a little bit at a time until it gets to the basic motor skills of swallowing and blinking and stuff like that. Yeah. And to this day, he disowned the 4 kids who were the primary people in that case. The one son that sat on the fence, who was sleazy, in my opinion, because he totally called me to say, I need estate planning, and then asked me how he could get money back from the attorney he hired, which I told him I wouldn't help him with before. So needless to say, he never became a client. Right. But the one daughter who was always on her dad's side is now peacefully living in a beautiful place that she purchased after that. But I can tell you, I think the worst thing that can ever happen in a family, worse than divorce, is being sued and criminally prosecuted by your own children.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I really think
especially
that's
when you've
probably
done nothing wrong.
Right?
Especially if you've done nothing wrong your entire life.
Right.
And then these kids just get money hungry.
Yep. You've earned money. You've taken care of your family. You've done what you need to do as a father, right? And of course, I'm sure there is some family history where it's maybe a little bit of what comes around goes around. Like, I'm sure he was absent from the house a lot, and it was his wife taking care of the kids more often than not. But I just don't think that kind of situation should happen to anybody. So that's my crazy story.
Wow. Well, that is a crazy story. And a little depressing, but it's needed because, when I'll just be personal. So hearing that story goes, yeah, I should probably go home and make sure my kids know that I love them. And of course they do. I tell them that all the time. And I work from home, so I'm always there. I'm never not there. But still, you want to make sure that you raise your kids right so they don't turn around and sue you.
Indeed.
Lord.
But, I will say, you don't always know how earlier life experiences are going to come in to help you out in a situation until you have a case like that. So when I started practicing law, I wasn't exactly sure. I want to do estate planning. Even in law school, I started meeting people. I liked solving problems. But my professor in law school said, Michelle, don't do an estate planning practice. You'll never make enough money to make a living. So I didn't. I started out doing what I call door law. And have you ever heard of door law?
No.
Door law is you take the case if somebody walks in the door with a check. So anybody who walks in the door with a check, we're taking your case. And what ends up happening with that is you end up having about 50% divorce cases, 40% criminal cases, and 10% contracts, workers' comp, interpleters, insurance, liens, whatever else, right? Material means liens. So I'd actually had the chance before getting this particular client with a guardianships case. I tried 2 felony trials before graduating from law school. And then I was in court 3 or 4 days a week while I was a general practice attorney on divorce and criminal cases. So, you might think estate planning lawyer, elder care lawyer, it's transactional. I don't need somebody who does trial work. Well, you might. And if you do, you need to find somebody who's got that trial work as part of their background.
Okay. Now let's get a little personal before we wrap up episode 1 of the origin story of Michelle Wilson of Wilson Legal. You're from Cumming, Georgia.
Yes.
Your offices reside here in Cumming, Georgia. It's where I live as well. So, what has changed in Cumming?
Oh my gosh, what has not changed in Cumming? It's probably the better thing to ask there.
Yeah.
My dad and mom and my uncles and my grandpas built the house they still live in South Forsyth in 1981. They came up with the idea from the house from doing the old tour of homes back when people were okay with people coming in their house and didn't hide from people ringing the doorbell like we kind of do now.
Oh yeah,
right.
We do.
So when
it's always a roofer. That's why.
A roofer or a pest control guy or a kid selling newspapers. I don't know anything. Girl Scout cookies though, you got to watch out for them. You always open the door for those.
Yeah, I'll take those. I'll take those.
But no, when I was growing up in Cumming, there were no street lights, there were no sidewalks, there was no pizza delivery. It was 15 minutes to the nearest gas station.
Wow. Yeah.
My dad built our road to the house out of a deer trail or a cow trail, and he graded it himself for 15 years. Wow. There were foot-deep ditches on either side, and I actually wrote an essay in English class in high school about it because the bumps always came back in the same spot. So when you would go on vacation, you'd always know you were home and exactly where on the road you were by where the bumps were.
Wow.
So he also pulled me out of the ditch at 2 a.m., one morning because I had come home and it was icy and I was driving my grandmother's 4-door Grand Am Pontiac and it slipped around perpendicular. All 4 wheels were in ditches and not touching the ground.
Nice.
And we were blocking the exit of anyone who lived on our end of the street. So that's kind of how I grew up. So what's changed? We've gotten some 4-lane, 5-lane roads. We've gotten pizza delivery, although they still wouldn't deliver to my parents' house until the subdivision was built in front of their house.
Oh, funny.
Because nobody wants to drive through the woods. Right. We used to have squatters living on the hill in front of us.
Oh, nice.
They were the nicest, quietest neighbors. They really were. And then we got Crazy Carol, who called the fire department on Dad when he had a burn pile out back. Right.
Nice. Crazy Carol.
Crazy Carol. So it was fun, but I didn't have neighbors. I didn't know what window blinds were for because the neighbors couldn't see our house. Still can't. I didn't know what air conditioning was until I was 13. We didn't have air conditioning until I was 13.
Wow.
We had an attic fan. Let's see. I went to private school, Christian school on 141 in cow pasture was the field. We had to watch out for cow pies when we played kickball. The school was a metal building that had 4 rooms and a double wide trailer.
Yeah.
My mom was my first grade teacher. She tried to get me to call her Miss Wilson, and that didn't work. Mm-hmm. After private school, I went to public school in the 6th grade. It was the worst year ever. I was the smartest kid in school and had all the geeky, dorky, nerdy clothes. Nothing cool. Mm-hmm. Didn't know what cool was until then. And then it became very clear very quickly. So yeah, I mean, growing up here was fun, but it was country. And so I actually moved to Atlanta for a year, and I didn't really think I'd come back here because it didn't feel like home anymore. Mm-hmm. You know, Exit 14 used to be a burned out house, Waffle House in Norman's Landing, and that was it.
That was it, yeah.
Right? Now, so my youngest sister, is 9 years younger than me. She graduated from South Forsyth 9 years after I did. Mm-hmm. So 9 years after I did. So my class was 204 kids because 10 kids got pregnant or dropped out before the end of school. My sister Nikki graduates. She graduates 9 years later, and it's 1,200 kids in her graduating class.
Wow.
Right?
That's massive, yeah.
And I don't know if you remember middle school. Randy Addis held up the middle school at gunpoint. It was before Columbine. And they put all of us on the football field, and we had news helicopters flying overhead. Oh, wow. But at that time, I think the middle school and the high school were 1,200 students combined.
Wow.
So, you know, from 200 kids to 1,200 kids in 9 years, this county has basically doubled in size every 10 years until 2003. So,
man, well, there's a lot of people that need estate planning.
Yeah. Well, I view it now as more customers, right?
That's right.
More potential customers.
More customers.
And you just have to take your time in traffic because it just takes you 30 minutes to get everywhere.
Yeah, it does. It's not as bad as living down in Atlanta. We used to live down in Buckhead and in Midtown, and that's a disaster.
Well, I lived in Buckhead too, and the difference I would say living in Buckhead to living up here is it still took you 30 minutes to get anywhere, and you had to pay to park.
Oh, yeah.
Up here, it takes 30 minutes to get somewhere, and you don't have to pay to park.
That's a bonus.
Kinda nice.
That is definitely a bonus. And we have a nice hospital, and you don't have to pay for parking there. Although if you go to the north side down in Dunwoody, you do have to pay.
Yes.
Or Sandy Springs, whatever. All right. Well, before we wrap up this episode, if people want to get in touch with you, what should they do?
They can email us at info@wilson-legal.com or call us at 770-205-7861. We have a team of 14 people now.
Wow, that's a big firm.
4 of whom are definitely, actually just me as the attorney until last Friday. We got our first associate.
Hey, all right.
So I know. So we definitely want to have the structure so that we can provide people with what they need when they need it. So there's always 2 to 4 people ready to answer the phone.
That's awesome. All right, well, let's wrap it up. Again, this is the Proactive Planner. This is episode 1. Many more to come. Michelle Wilson, thank you so much. And we'll see you guys soon. Take care.
Thank you.